Good day, everyone. We are today having a podcast with Slovak think tank, INESS. It is the Institute of Economic and Social Studies. And we would like to talk about easing measures of the quarantine in Slovakia. And today we having as our guest Mартіном Влачінським. It is an analyst of INESS.
Hi, nice to connect with you.
Nice to connect with you too. And I know that INESS has prepared a manifesto for the Slovakian government on fighting coronavirus. So what were its main points and how much did public officials actually listen to it? And what suggestions were taken into account and what were ignored?
Yeah. Maybe I will just, for a start, describe the situation in the country when we were preparing the manifesto. In Slovakia, as in many countries, the government noticed very late that something is happening. It was the end of February when everybody started thinking, oh, maybe there's some problem around. But then we really slammed on the brakes pretty quickly. But then again, it seemed, okay, there is no big surge in cases. It seems the big wave did not come, but the government was a bit hopeless. They slammed on the brakes and they started looking around. It seemed like they really don't know what to do next. So we did not propose some detailed plan what to do next. It was more like several points. Okay, we survived the first stage. It seems we survived it pretty fine compared to many other countries, but now we have to understand that the situation we are in, the quarantine, let's call it, is hurting the economy, is hurting employees, employers, but also, for example, many patients with other illnesses, because a lot of doctors went into, let's say, emergency mode, and it was difficult to get any kind of care. So we should move from the complete national widespread precautions into more, let's say, detailed, specified, localized, intelligent system of quarantine and start to opening the economy as soon as possible. It was very simply said in several points, and we wanted to start or make the discussion about opening economy faster. Your question, how was it received? It wasn't received in a way that the prime minister would take the paper and like faint, completely overwhelmed by the content. We consider it part of general broader discussion about what to do with the economy. And I don't know how much our manifesto helped, but it seems in the last 2, even 3 weeks, the government changed its way of thinking and now really understands the need to move the economy a bit faster.
Could I ask a question on this as well? Like you said that in last weeks the government started moving out of the lockdown more faster, and like in Ukraine we see that this exit from lockdown is to more extent sector driven, like businesses come to the government building, protesting and in fact pushing for opening their sectors. However, like what we see is like lack of going out from, as we call it, horizontal quarantine. Like, for example, public transport will be still closed in Ukraine, and education institutions like kindergartens and schools will be still closed. So it, in fact, put economy on break to the same extent as some sector restrictions. So like what you see in Slovakia, is it only like sectoral easing or is it broad-based?
I would say it's mixed. Of course, the main voice comes from the businesses, and the businesses are being opened. But also, for example, there's a big discussion about schools. Since kids are at home, their parents, or at least one parent, usually has to be with them if they are smaller. So it's a big constraint again on the economy, on the parents. So one of the big discussions about schools. Schools are not opening yet, and we don't know any exact date when they should open. But for example, church services opened, I think last week on Wednesday. Of course, with some restrictions like the maximum number of people, you should not sit together, and so on and so on. But services opened. Uh, for example, regarding public transport, we are talking about lockdown, but in Slovakia, except like 2 or 3 days, really wasn't a broad lockdown as we saw in Italy or Spain. For example, the public transport was turned into holiday mode, but still, so it means less service, less buses, less trains, but still kept on going. So you were free to take train whenever and wherever inside the country you wanted. Now the transport companies are moving back into normal schedule, but it never was a direct order that you have to provide less or you have to provide more. The number of passengers dropped substantially since beginning of March. So anyway, it had no meaning for them to operate in full power.
Martin, and we saw different modes of this lockdown in different countries. Like, for example, I heard from my former colleague who is working in Austria that there was a formal ban on office working for non-essential like office employees in Austria. And like in Ukraine, like this uh, artificial decrease in mobility was mainly based on these restrictions on public transport. Was there any formal ban on operations of some economy sectors that are not directly dangerous in terms of pandemics? Like not speaking about like cafes or cultural events. Was there any ban on, for example, work regular production on industrial enterprises, or the direct ban of office work in offices not in instant mode?
No, there was no official ban. Yet we saw that majority of companies motivated or even decided that their workers should work from home when it's possible. But still, you can find some offices which are open and people go there. But there was no official ban. Also in the industry, a lot of factories closed, but it was mainly due to either total collapse of demand or disruptions in the logistic network. For example, the car makers, all of them closed, but it was mainly because they have the problems with parts delivery and the demand for cars really plummeted. So, but there was no direct order to close. Direct order was to close, as you said, places where people gather. So it's cafes, restaurants, shops, hotels, church masses, but and schools, of course, but that's generally all.
We have seen the article on your website about like small discussion about if summer holiday for children in schools should be like um, um, should be continue like as it was previous years, or it should be changed because of the pandemic, and maybe children should go to schools even if it's summer. If such discussion is actually in the government, or it's just like one of the ideas that could be done.
Um, yeah, it's a part of the discussion. I have to say it was not very popular proposal, and I don't think it will be applied. The main point was mainly from the point of view of parents that now they have to stay 2 months at home with kids, maybe even more, and then almost immediately a summer vacation, which is July, August in Slovakia, starts. So some parents will be forced to be maybe 5 months at home with their smaller kids. So it's really a long period. So our suggestion was mainly to help the parents to have a place to put the kids and go to work. But as I said, it's really not sure when the next school year officially starts. So it's not a closed discussion yet, but it seems probably the school holiday will go on.
And we have seen also that we have made some digest about different countries in Europe, how different countries have applied different strategies to support business and to the economy. And we have seen that Slovakia actually had some type of support of business depending of the number of like benefit losses in this period. What is your position? If such measures is enough, sufficient for support the small and medium business, if it actually works, and what should be done also?
There is support scheme to pay certain amount of money per employee to the company, depending on the turnover decline of small companies. It's not a lot of money. It's several hundred euro. The average salary in Slovakia is slightly over 1,000 euro. So it does not really completely swap the costs for wages. The problem is that I'm not even sure that it already works. I mean, it was created over a month ago. I know a lot of reports that there has been huge chaos in forms and accepting these forms. You know, a complete the bureaucracy was completely unprepared for a completely new scheme like this. So there was complete chaos, and I'm not even sure that the company already started receiving the money. We say in INESS that the main goal of state should be to protect the employees from falling into some poverty level, but the state should not attempt to completely simulate a working economy. So we should not pretend that now we are going to cover all lost revenues of restaurants, all lost revenues of all kinds of companies, because simply it's not possible. It's extremely expensive, and the economy is on halt. Let's say half or 1/3 of the economy is on halt, and we cannot pretend for several months that okay, we are just going to pay you some subsidies and in a few months you will start again and everything will be okay. So for now, the government announced a lot of things. They have big problems in implementation. Maybe they even are not so much in hurry to implement them because they understand that it can be pretty damn expensive. And we have a very strong automotive industry, which is the key sector in Slovakia. And without the Germans, without the French, without the British buying cars, we really can do any kind of fiscal dance. If the cars are not sold, then we can't help the economic decline. It's pretty simple.
There was a lot talks about the two different strategies, more responsible social distancing and more strong quarantine measures, different options. What telling polls in Slovakia if actually citizens are ready, even without quarantine, to be more responsible, and do we believe that actually restrictions that was implemented in Slovakia could be weaker, and it could also help and maybe harm less the economy?
In Slovakia, except the Easter holiday, there never was a restriction of movement, so you could walk whenever you want, wherever you want. You were not supposed to gather in large groups, but I mean, if you went to a walk in the forest with friends, nobody would stop you there. But from the first days, we were very fast to implement informally some social distancing. I mean, for example, the surgical masks, it went from 0 to almost 100% people covered in like 1 week. So on Monday, nobody was wearing a surgical mask. On Friday, everybody. So this was, for example, very, very fast. And we, from the almost first day, we saw either politicians or TV anchors or all kind of people who are appearing in public on TV to start wearing them. So it was really really quick movement. Also, a lot of people stayed at home, and you could really see the streets are empty. A lot less cars are going around. So even without any direct restriction of movement, people quarantined themselves pretty quickly, I would say. So I don't think there was a need for any kind of very strict government measure to restrict people to do movements. We also, which is a bit unique, we also introduced a 14-day state quarantine for anybody who comes from abroad, since a lot of Slovaks works abroad. And for the first months, you could choose. You could choose to go into state quarantine, which is in some state buildings, or you could quarantine yourself at home. But this was not really. It was checked randomly. After some weeks, the government decided that everybody who comes from abroad has to go for 14 days into the state quarantine center under police supervision.
And maybe the last question from
Andrei, could I continue with your previous question? And what do you see any dynamics in opinion of Slovak public? Like in Ukraine, it was very, like, as you said, on like first weeks, like end of March, beginning of April, like people were really very fearful. Like you could see empty streets and even no cars sometimes. So like people were really staying at home. But then like this effect of fear were out, and like now you see like traffic jams and much more business activity. Do you see like the same dynamics in Slovak Republic, in neighboring countries, if you follow them? Whether this effect of fear is still there? Because like, for example, yesterday I read editorial in Financial Times, and FT journalists were very worried about the effects that even after quarantine is formally ended, people are so fearful that they just will decline to go to work as usual.
Yeah, I think people are more relaxed now. And for example, terraces in restaurants were opened in pubs, so you can see slowly people coming back even to have a beer. And there are definitely more people on the streets. Also, the weather is much better than in March, so a lot of people goes out. Uh, so yes, people are relaxing. I have to say, for the whole 2 months, we had a very good numbers in Slovakia in terms of infections. We did not really have the typical hill. As you see, that first starts low, then goes to very high daily cases, and then goes down. Our worst days were around, we had only 2 days in the last 2 months when we had more than 100 infected per day. And a lot of these people were coming from the quarantine center, so they're really not in a community and really not very dangerous. For past 2 or 3 weeks, we have like 10 or even less infections per day. So the numbers are very good, and yeah, people are relaxing more, and also it becomes more and more obvious that the economic impact will be very difficult for the country, for the whole Europe. So the discussion also shifts in this direction. we had like 26 deaths for until now. A big majority of them is coming from retirement centers. So of course there is a big discussion how to protect the retirement centers, because we see once there is one infected, in few weeks you can have 20 deaths there. So that's a big thing, but also a bigger discussion is developing about people with cancer, prematurely born kids, and similar groups of patients who really had, let's say, some problems to get care. So also a lot of doctors is mentioning that there are many other people with other problems which can worsen if we don't start moving again. So I think for now the country is going more relaxed. On the other hand, it seems we are not moving in terms of opening the borders with other countries. So inside our country, we are more relaxing. The government is more relaxing. On the other hand, there's not a light yet on how to open the borders. For example, at least in Visegrad 4, or at least with Czech Republic or Austria.
And the last question from my side, it's I know that worldwide, especially like we all seen rates of unemployment in the USA, and we know that in Ukraine, like quarantine, economic measures, economic crisis generally have impacted a lot on the employment. And we have seen on different platforms where people are looking for jobs that number of CVs are rising, and number of positions and vacancies that looking for is decline. So what is your recommendation for Slovak government? What should be done for support economy in next months? What should be strategy for exiting quarantine and support the economy?
Yeah. As I mentioned, we believe that the government should not pretend they are going to that everything will be the same in June or July as it was in let's say February or January. There will have to be some restructuring of the economy. So the focus should be not on preventing any kind of layoffs in companies, because this will be needed for the companies to restructure. But the government should focus on preventing sleeping people from, let's say, mid class into lower classes, because a lot of, for example, small business owners, restaurant owners who were doing fine with their financial lives, not great but fine, within 1 month or 2 months are declining into really deep financial troubles. So the focus should be on creating some kind of social net, but not to make sure that if a company had 12,000 employees in January, that for all money we have to support them to have 12,000 employees also in August. So that won't be possible. If we tried, it will be extremely expensive. So let's focus the limited resources on the most viable things to do, and that's to protect complete meltdown of fiscal situation in the country and the social situation, but not to protect every company from any kind of decline.
Thank you, Martin. It was quite a productive discussion, in my opinion. Maybe do you have some questions about Ukrainian situation or our recommendations to the government? We will happy to share it also.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear about how Ukrainian workers are doing, especially when it comes to those who are working abroad. I know a lot of Ukrainians work in Slovakia, even more in Poland or Czech Republic. I know that, for example, in Slovakia, some of them were not at home since Christmas, because when they leave, they won't be able to return. So maybe my question is this a big discussion? Did a lot of abroad workers came back to Ukraine and cannot return back to work, or is it vice versa that a lot of them got stuck in, let's say, the Western countries and now cannot or don't want to go back home because they won't be able to return?
Yeah, it is a question that was raised a lot by our like foreign partners, media, and it is also a big question of domestic debate. Like in fact, like we did a study a few years ago and estimated that on any given day, approximately 2.5 million Ukrainians are working abroad. And the biggest recipient is certainly Poland, with over 1 million Ukrainians working there. And the specific case of Poland is that, as you know, like they have a very easy scheme of providing short-term job permits for up to 6 months, and rather comparatively easy system of providing longer-term job permits. Which means that by the beginning of March, before like this crisis started, majority of Ukrainians working in Poland were working officially, having official contracts and having social security. And it explains a lot why like the number of those who returned to Ukraine was significantly less than this 2.5 millions. There was an estimate that like the net return of Ukrainians during these weeks of Ukrainians going back home was something like 450,000 people, and certainly not all of them were labor migrants. They were just like tourists, businessmen, like just regular people returning from trips abroad. And so we could estimate that something like, for example, 10% of Ukrainian labor migrants really returned to Ukraine, mostly those who worked in sectors that were closed, like cafes, for example, or hotels, or those who just used visa-free regime for some short-term unofficial jobs in Poland or in Slovakia or in other EU countries. So we saw that we understand that it has rather limited effect, for example, on remittances. But then the next problem emerged. Like we have a very weak government currently, both like intellectually and politically, and it resulted in very like unpredictable policies related to international passenger transportation, crossing borders, all these restrictions. And there were a number of scandals where, for example, EU companies that were like providing temporary workers for especially agriculture, like agriculture in Finland, agriculture in the United Kingdom, also different kinds of jobs in Poland, where like leasing aircrafts, passenger aircrafts, and like those like large airlines that currently are not doing any regular flights, like formally like passenger international passenger transportation is like banned in Ukraine, and so but they were requesting one of like ad hoc permits for those flights, like with and like those companies that were like hiring these aircrafts, they provided all documents showing that all people on board of those aircrafts were like they were having formal contracts with employers for longer term employment. However, like there were a number of scandals with government officials refusing to provide those aircrafts with the right to have a flight. And it was a very big political scandal because unexperienced prime minister said that oh, it is a very good idea for all Ukrainians who worked abroad to remain in the country. We have a lot of let's put it in brackets, low-paid jobs for them to be done in Ukraine. So people were starting speaking about in fact being an object of the sort of slavery, the sort of modern slavery, with the government closing the border to labor migrants. However, it is really a very interesting case showing that also, in my opinion, and you could comment on this, that something is also wrong in the EU countries with when you have a case with rising unemployment, but nobody of those countries having not enough locals to do jobs, and countries like Poland, like Finland, like Germany are asking Ukrainians to do jobs while unemployment in those countries is surging.
Yeah, yeah. I think the main problem is with the structure of jobs. For example, in the first weeks of the pandemic, in the beginning of March, a big highway construction in eastern Slovakia was almost halted because a lot of workers, either from Ukraine or Romania and Serbia, went home, and really there was no replacement for them. This is one of the things why we tell the government that we have to be prepared for some restructuring of the economy. For example, let's be honest, travel agencies, hotels, even some restaurants, and places where a lot of people gather will have troubles for many months more probably. So mainly it would be wise if some employees in this sector start to move in, for example, into agriculture and similar. Of course, it's very difficult. If you work in a hotel, you are not going to milk a cow. So that's one of the problems. Second is that until now, there were not really big layoffs. Most of the employees stays in the companies for now. Okay, we don't have April numbers. Our March numbers were quite okay when it comes to unemployment, almost no change. But it takes some time in Slovakia to fire somebody and for them to go through the system and appear as unemployed. So maybe even April numbers will be okay, and we start to see some big troubles only in May numbers or in June numbers or even later. Of course, it's depending all when the Western economies will open and our factories will be able to export again. Uh, but for now, the workers from Ukraine and Serbia and Romania, which are typically the three countries we take employees from, they are still kind of missing, or not even missing, because a lot of them stayed here, as I said, especially Ukrainians. But they won't be here for 1 year. They want to go back home to their families, so it's possible they start leaving, and it will be very difficult for them to return, as we already spoke.
In fact, it is a chance for those countries that are recipients of Ukrainian labor to use this time for changing the system of providing long-term job permits. Certainly, it will be politically not as easy. There will be it would be unpopular because people do not think about these structural differences, and they will say the same thing as I say, why taking more Ukrainians if we have a lot of unemployed Slovaks. And it will be also better for Ukraine, for Ukrainian economy, because if for example Slovak Republic decides to open door for Ukrainians for longer term employments, and it increases chances that those people will take their families and go to Slovak Republic for a longer time. And the same case with Poland. So now it is a rather interesting time in terms of making these decisions. But what we see from Ukrainian statistics, and you are saying the same, is that majority of Ukrainian labor migrants decided to stay for the time of pandemic in countries which they were working at.
Yeah, I'm a bit skeptical about what you said, because first, we are pretty closed nation. We don't like anybody coming here, so it's very difficult to even in the good times to persuade the government and the popular opinion that we should maybe open more the labor market. And we really had good times for the past 2-3 years, with the unemployment going really low. And for example, especially in construction or in agriculture, it was even not possible to exist without either Ukrainians or Serbians or Romanians. But if more and more people start becoming unemployed, of course, the public opinion will get even more hostile to any idea of more opening the labor market for foreigners, of course, outside the EU, because the EU is opened. Yeah, maybe one more question about, you already mentioned that the public transport is somehow getting back to normal in Ukraine and so on. So is there a really, you mentioned before we started recording that you prepared some kind of phase out plan. Was this somehow reflected by the government? Do they really have a written plan, that's step 1, step 2, step 3, or is just ad hoc decisions?
It's strange, like they in fact took the name of our idea, because like we were the ones that devised together, like our CES team, the name adaptive quarantine. And the government in fact just took it word by word and said that Ukraine needs adaptive quarantine, which is exactly the same that you proposed in your paper, like localized quarantine based on dynamics of infections in localities, because like we understood that this pandemics is of the cluster nature. And however, like in terms of substance, like they were not as like relaxed as we were, and like what we saw, and we just like published an opinion piece in one of the popular online news platforms yesterday, that like these phases that Ukraine has, like they proposed 5 phases, but the difference from like what we saw in, for example, Visegrad countries was that like these phases were without dates. Like there were some criteria, some rather complicated criteria for some phases, like the number of new infections being lower than the number of recovered patients, or there should be not more than such number of new infections, and those new infections should not be connected to each other. So rather complicated criteria without exact dates. And the decision was made, and just yesterday we had it published in the evening, on opening all shops and opening summer terraces in Ukraine starting from Monday. And the problem is that we found that like this first stage of relaxing quarantine was very socially unjust. Like we are not a left-wing think tank, like we are the same as your organization, more liberal, but we understood that it is clearly very like socially unjust, because there were like many decisions of opening business sectors, but public transport remains to be closed. Like we have for like buses, trolley buses, trams, they are operating only for those who have the special document showing that they are essential workers. And underground systems in Kiev, Kharkiv, and Dnipro are closed completely starting from mid-March, which means that if you are a low-income employed person and, for example, living in one district of Kiev and your working place is in 25 kilometers across the river, then you have no chance to resume working if your company is not is not in such a good financial health to provide some hired buses to bring you back on a working place. And the same goes with education. Like we haven't discussed like what is the plan in Slovakia related to kindergartens, but in Ukraine, like it is practically like 100% that schools will not open till the 1st of September, except maybe like having final exams for the last class that will enter the university this year. And but for kindergarten there is still no decision. So we see that exactly those working like those families that are working with lower incomes and that have small kids, that as it is the same in all countries, that have, because of this lower income per capita in the household, those are the most disadvantaged on this new stage of quarantine. They have like, in fact, shops are open, you could spend, but you have no chance to earn if you do not have access to public transport, and if you could not work because you have a small kid you need to take care of.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it seems that in terms of the quarantine we had a lot of similarities, but the public transport is a big exception, because in Slovakia it was never closed. Even the government was encouraging the companies to continue running the services. And we have to admit, public transport is a dangerous place in terms of the viruses. I would say more dangerous than any kind of walking on the streets. But yet the government really encourage them to keep on going. The interesting thing is that we never mentioned it, but we had an election on 29th of February. So all the government lost the election, but they were still holding power for next 3 weeks. So it was like a government in demise, going through the first half of the pandemics, and they turned over the keys to the new government, and so a completely different, very hostile government to the previous one took over and continued the work. So it was interesting to watch the transition, and it went quite smoothly, I have to say. I would say even surprisingly smoothly from one hand to another.
I could say that this format of quarantine that we have in Ukraine is in fact reflecting the oligarchic influence. Because, like, for example, if you are an oligarch and you have your assets, for example, in metal production, in ferrous metals, and you have large enterprises with tens of thousands of people working there, like this problem with public transport is not a really big problem for you, because you have no formal bans for industries like in Italy, for example, and you have enough financial resources and you could get permits from national police to run this company leased bus services. While if you are a small company, then you fully rely on public transport for your employees to be at your working place. So it just added indirectly to this unjust system, and I could even believe that it was done deliberately, not to kill small business, like they are not so like sophisticated, but just deciding to fight mobility by closing public transport, not by closing non-essential sectors of economy. Because I understood from what our chief person responsible for fighting pandemics at Ministry of Health, what he said was that public transport, in his opinion, is to more extent a vehicle of mobility than the issue in terms of spread of infection. So they did it deliberately to minimize mobility.
You have mentioned that in Slovakia, did you have some political factor like elections? We also have another another type of such factor, because in this autumn we will have local elections for mayors, and we see now in different cities. In Kiev, for example, we have like each day mayor of Kiev have separate press briefings with his own numbers about the Kiev, his own decisions about the city, and we have also like a scandal in another regional level with mayor of Cherkasy, who said that he took off restrictions because it's hard the local business. So we see how that there are like it's such crisis also impact on that local authorities playing against national authorities because they want to gain some points before the elections and show that its national politics are against the small and medium businesses, and we are like local representatives are more for you.
In Slovakia, the municipalities, the local governments are pretty weak, so we do not see much activity from their side. They don't have competencies to do much, and also the current government, they are either friendly to the current government or neutral. There are not many mayors who would be directly opposed to the current government. So no, there are no big fights between the central government and the local governments. Maybe only just the interesting point that the capital Bratislava in early March, when the first cases appeared, one or two were in families with children in school in Bratislava, and the capital was the first to close schools. So the municipality decided we are going to close these schools. So they were the first spark to start the nationwide closing of schools and businesses. So the municipalities can provide an example, but it's not like they had the free hand to follow any kind of more broader policies to do anything.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Gleb. I think it was quite interesting talk and exchange of opinions and different cultural experience during this very strange crisis, never experienced by any country. So it was quite productive.
Thank you. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you as well. Wish you good luck and good health.
Thank you.